Well, Marna,
Hi, how are you doing, Brandon?
I'm doing good.
I'm glad to hear it. I have a series of questions that I was hoping to get you to answer for me, and that might help my patients and other customers to learn a little bit more about this technology that I am finding extremely exciting.
Perfect. Well,
So,
I hope that my background in engineering and the technical specs as a distributor, as a co-manufacturer of the technology and co-founder of Axiom H2 Global, I can assist you with that endeavor. If you have questions, let's hear them and let's see if I can answer them.
well, that sounds great. So, initially, I just wanted a real generalized question, and basically, what does, and speaking of which, this is the Axiom machine. And
Your speaker is a little low when you're looking at it.
can you
Good.
see it now?
Yep. Yeah, I can see it. Good.
Okay. So, this is what we're talking about.
You're cutting out in the mic. I don't know if you're.
You can't hear me?
You have to be close. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So, this is the machine that we're excited about, and I know that it produces molecular hydrogen. That's what I know. And so, from that point, I want you to tell me about the machine. What does it do, and why do we want it?
Sure. So, first off, the Axiom H2 device, there's three different tiers of it. There's the H300, H600, and H3000 right now. Each of those correlate to the flow rate output. So, and that flow rate is of a certain concentration of hydrogen. So, what is, and the hydrogen that we're producing is not a like H variant, it's an H2 molecular hydrogen combination, which is medicinal in many ways that enables your body to utilize it in various antioxidant, suppressant, and reactant methods. Now, how do we do that? And what is it that we're doing? We have what's called a permeation ion technology that allows it to allows us to take distilled water that is, almost pure water, and we
So it has
take.
to be distilled.
Yes, yeah, we take
Okay.
distilled water. We don't have any like we don't have any like blocks or depending on different agents, you can put minerals in the water, things. You don't have to do any of that. There's no cleaning, there's no gunk creation. We just take distilled water. We use a platinum uh, core process to actually act as a catalyst to break up the water from the hydrogen, and then we reintroduce it into a dual chamber and to make this H2 molecular structure, and then we send that down the tube. Now, this makes it less reactive in the actual tube itself and gets through to the actual body in the point of therapy. And when you either take it through the inhalation or through the goggles or through the headphones, each of those various verticals of therapy or those options have their own specialty outcome that you should look forward to in terms of the medicinal benefits. Now,
Okay.
additionally, what I would say is that at the core level, you're getting a certain percentage of hydrogen into your body, and then your body's going to do that with that what it will on a natural process. Um, to go into the more specifics on that, the body does a whole lot more when it's working at its efficacy. So there's a primary effect of the hydrogen, and then there are secondary and tertiary effects, right?
Now, with that being said, what's going to be happening to any given person who's taking this molecular hydrogen in is going to depend on how well they are functioning currently with their body. In other words, are they in a chronic disease process? Are they a healthy athlete? Are they so? Am I understanding that how when you take the hydrogen in, it's going to react a little differently depending on the host person?
Yeah. So, um, depending on the state of your health, there are different things that you can expect. If you're chronically dehydrated and you have an extreme oxidative pressure in your body, which is to say that your body is not really functioning at, you would say its external internal mechanisms aren't really complying with what you need, you're going to have all sorts of different signals that show that you're not healthy, as well as you're going to have symptoms, right? Whether that be arthritis, whether that be chronic inflammation across the body, chronic dehydration, fascial depletion, fascial entrapments, compensations. These are all going to be consistent symptoms that you're feeling across the board, which in any state, when you start to actually do the inhalation, you're going to feel that your skin starts to smooth out. You're going to, because when the body actually gets a little bit of hydration, the hydrogen comes in, it either acts as an antioxidant, or it breaks into normal water in the body and processes it back into H2O. What ends up happening is that it hydrates the body. So when your core is more hydrated, the body doesn't have to steal from the external sides. So your fascia becomes more functional, right?
I see.
Now, on a very significant beneficial side of that is if you are chronically dehydrated, doing these hydrogen therapy sessions is going to significantly help with not just the short-term hydration, but it also builds the pathways so that you're not stealing as much resources from the external layers, right? And helps integrate that. Now, on the tertiary side of that, where we're talking about, if you are perfectly healthy, you're hydrated, and everything is fine, well, you're still going to have oxidative pressure and stress, right? And there's still going to be, as you would say, damage to the lungs or damaged tissue in the lungs in different areas that the antioxidative pressure from the hydrogen that you inhale is going to be beneficial for. Everyone, I don't care who you are, everyone has been around smoking damage in some way, shape, or form, or you can be on the high if you even drive, whether or not you have the external and internal vents, you're inhaling some form of carbon monoxide, some form of carbon dioxide, some form of irritant into the lungs.
General pollution is going
General
to
pollution, yeah, and
cause
so
problems with the lungs.
yes, and that's no matter who you are. So those general pollutants will get into the lungs and then start to build up over time. And a lot of times, in some way, shape, or form, we do think that we can get rid of them, right? We can detox them out, as you would say, or we can shed them out. But many times they actually just become entrapped, and we find different routes in our lungs to mitigate the sacrificial pathways that have been provided. So what we look for is, we say, even if you're perfectly healthy, if you have any respiratory issues or circulatory issues, this is going to significantly help with that. And it's going to help bolster and reinforce what's already working, right? So then the question you probably didn't ask there is, well, if you're perfectly healthy, is there a point where this is too much, and will it hurt me at any point? And that's really the nice thing with this technology is, if your body does reach a saturation point where it's too much hydrogen, well, you just breathe it out. It doesn't bond. It doesn't do anything, right? So it won't act as an irritant or as a negative side effect or creating adverse reactions where it doesn't need to, right?
So there's absolutely no risk to a problem with it.
No, there's no risk to a problem. There are cautions and precautions for people who have epilepsy. They had strokes, right? If they've had seizures, chronic seizures, you do want to have pillows and things laid down ahead of time with any type of therapy you do. You want to have someone near you who knows how to mitigate for seizures, because sometimes when you open up different pathways and that have been oxidized, it can re-trigger the events, and it's called an opening or breakthrough seizure, as they call it,
right?
Which can occur. But this is just a precaution that we like to make, and that would be for any beneficial therapy.
And it's not necessarily a bad thing that it's happening.
No, they call it breakthrough. They call it a breakthrough seizure, right? So you essentially, when you have a buildup of neurochemical hormonal centers, like agents in the bloodstream or in the local region for the neurological hormonal center, and when that center becomes reconnected, that buildup has to be used, right?
Right.
And then it gets used all at once. It triggers this massive seizure.
Got it.
And then, but that once that pathway is reconstructed, it's reconstructed, right? So then
now it's reconstructed, and you've got better flow in general.
Yeah, not to make this because this is for a general basis. I'm not to make it on a more technical, advanced level. One of the beliefs that why people have chronic seizures is because those pathways are healing at a slow rate. They heal, get overused, they get damaged, and then they heal again. And that's why you get these. That's why you get these circumstantial seizures, as you'd say.
Okay, all right.
But anyways, to digress. So the technology is very not adverse low profile, has a very low adverse profile. You might feel, if you're completely healthy, you might feel a little lightheaded. That just means that you're taking too quick of breaths, and you should calm down. It's actually
Yeah.
self-induced. And
Slower,
one of the,
slower breaths. Yeah.
yeah, and one of the things that people also don't recognize too is with patients who have COPD or they have some form of respiratory issues that are significant enough. Um, Sometimes they'll have very shallow, consistent, or fast-paced breaths, and they won't realize it. And then
Mm-hmm.
they'll start to get lightheaded because they sustain the same amount of rapid paced breaths, and then they'll slow
Instead of
down.
altering, yeah, I
Yeah,
get it.
and so when you actually open up, and this is another thing that the device does really well, is we can actually open up the lung capacity, the capacitance, I say, for the lungs, because if you do have bonded gunk in the lungs and the H2 hits into that bonded gunk and decouples it, well, that site opens up again for activation, right?
Right,
Okay, so if you're opening up these sites for activation, your capacitance for breathing in is increasing, which means you don't have to take as many breaths.
right,
So if you
right.
can reduce the necessity for these rapid breaths, you can calm down the respiratory system. And in turn, this acts that respiratory system as a secondary feature acts as an adjutant for the circulatory system.
Exactly.
So if you're breathing constantly and chronically too fast, your heart rate's going to be accelerated, right?
Right.
And so we can actually lower the resting heart rate because we get these slower, more consistent, more intentful breaths, right?
Got it.
And then the heart rate follows, so the resting heart rate decreases, which is one of the
Okay.
things we actually see with patients who have significant high resting heart rates that are, putting cardiovascular stress on their different vessels.
Right. I want to do a quick recap real before I ask some more questions. So my
Sure.
understanding is that H2 therapy is going to, one, act as a form of an antioxidant.
Yep.
It can also trigger another avenue of antioxidant work,
Yep.
and it can um, assist in, not just assist, but it does dramatically increase the overall hydration of the body and on a cellular level.
Yeah. So just to reinforce that concept, when we're talking about um, oxidizing agents, right? Oxidizing agents are any time that you have essentially some type of electron discharge that needs to be provided for, drained, or bonded to. And, oxidative stress is often from the oxygen in the air wanting to bond with things to release the electronegativity side of that. Well, H2 happens to be extremely antioxidizing, which means it restores the beneficial portion of that formula and then that system. And so when you're breathing it in, it acts as an antioxidant, which is the beneficial side. So it's more stabilizing, as you would say.
So because of that, that is why this would be beneficial for athletes.
Yes. Yeah. This performance wise, we have significant celebrities that are using the technology to see significant results from the performance. We know
Mm-hmm.
that this helps with hydration. This helps with total body function. This helps with optimization, right? And we see functional differences across the board with overall mental acuity and other features as well. Because when the body's more hydrated, when your body's able to function, everything gets easier, right? When it's not,
Right.
when you're at a lower efficiency for overall functionality, things will decrease no matter what, right? And you'll
That's
see
when you
things
wake
go.
up in the morning and everything hurts. You know there's a
So
problem.
yes. Yeah. So your second point though was that um, though this does have a primary antioxidizing effect, there's also a secondary effect that it naturally restores the body's normalizing functions within itself. Um,
Okay.
this can happen because of what's called gene expression, right? So if you have cells, so the gas permeates through the body, right? And depending on how the gas permeates through the body, there's a natural mechanism for how your cellular structures can communicate from an internal external layer, right? You have the internal environment of the cell, right? The cell produces mRNA recall, some type of nucleic response syndrome back and forth to regulate its internal structure. Well,
Right.
additionally, it reacts to the external environment. So whatever a cell is in, whatever environment, whether it's a viscous liquid, whether it's in stabilized capillary response areas, it's always going to be calling up genetic code or gene expressions to respond to the external layer,
Right.
unless that interaction with the commutative barrier is blocked. And then we get what's called gene expression obstruction, right? And this is where you
Oh,
get
that's right.
this is where you get into situations where you have these weird syndromes that occur on a genetic level that people can explain, as well as mitigation factors for cancer production, which is one of the real big problems in terms of metastasizing tumors, right?
Right.
And it's because essentially the cell can't communicate, so the cell starts to mutate inside, and then it can't regulate. So why is that occurring? Well, it's because there's oxidative pressure on the different cell activation sites, right, that have been either blocked, impeded, or gunked up. And they say it's called crystallization of the cellular structure, right? So it becomes unreactive, which is to say
Right.
non-expressive.
You're not having flow through the membrane.
Yes. And you want flow through the membrane. You want in and out flow through the membrane, because the easier it is for cells to communicate with their environment, the more corrective they can be towards the environment and towards the
Right.
internal structure of themselves, right? And
Exactly.
so why does the hydrogen gas help with that? Well, if you breathe it in, it's going to permeate through the entire body. And within seconds, there's about a centimeter to 2 centimeters of radial permeation from whatever point of contact the gas takes. So from the actual lungs itself, it gets into the bloodstream, and the bloodstream carries it everywhere, right? So when it's in the body, right, the H2 molecule acts as a decoupler for a lot of these skunked up membrane sites, right? These active sites that have been impeded, or they have different active agents. Now, here's the thing: you'd say, well, Brendan, what if there's good processes already going on in those hormone sites and those active sites, right? Then I would say that's great, but the environment's naturally loaded with a concoction of the hormones the cells are supposed to be reacting to, which means there should be a decoupling and coupling constantly. There should be
All
always a
the
good
time.
flow,
Yeah. That should be.
right? So you should never get stuck into specific states where cells are reacting to things without having the next stage of reactivity occurring, which is why, enabling the body to decouple some of the gunked up sites that have been inhibited from a viral standpoint, from a bacterial phage standpoint, from an inhibitorial stage, would be very beneficial. It
Yeah.
enables the body to naturally utilize
So
itself.
the natural it actually does aid in
Say that again.
all
Sorry,
of the
you're
functions of all of the systems.
come closer to the mic. Sorry, you're
So it's helping all of the systems, not just the cardiovascular, but the immune system and the endocrine system, and
yes.
all of this is all being affected.
Yes. So and that's where I say there's a primary effect and there's secondary and tertiary. The primary modality, the primary systems that we look at in functional medicine is we're looking at, can we improve the respiratory system and the circulatory system? Well, between those two systems, with everything else gets affected as well, right? If
Right.
you're so, you know, whether it's your digestive system, whether it's your nervous system, especially your nervous system because of the fascial layer mechanized
Hmm.
behind it. But all different things get affected as a secondary and tertiary effect of that. So it's
Right.
really helping your full body, which is like the analogy I like to use is that when we die, right, we don't die of one thing. One thing might trigger it, but everything fails, right? You know,
Right.
if you lose your heart, you're also going to lose your lungs, right? You don't Everything fails consistently and stacked on top of each other. It's not like your body keeps going for a year with your heart pumping if you lose your lungs. It's like, no, these things
Right.
all have a cascading failure effect, which means that you're defined by your worst, right? So you need to make sure that your worst systems are getting the effective therapy that they need.
Which leads to my next question. So,
Okay.
there's a lot of diseases out there. So, in specific, there's been some studies done. What kind of disease processes can really be positively shifted by regular use of this device?
Yes. So my I always like to address tools as light switches. Like if you find the right hammer for the right nail, right? And my light switch event, which is to say that when you use the device and you flip a switch, the right light turns on, not any other light. The fan doesn't turn on, just the thing that you want to happen, and and you can depend on that to do that stop, right? So my light switch event, which I say for the Axiom, is anyone who has smoking damage, who has respiratory issues, who has a very high resting heartbeat, right? And the reasoning behind that is because if you have smoking damage that is passively draining the efficacy of your lungs and your respiratory system, and when the first time you use the device, you're going to feel more energy immediately because about 80% of that gunk in the first breath is going to start to be broken down. Now, it's not going to be complete, but the hydrogen is reactive enough to where there is a significant difference. So patients who have chronic smoking and respiratory issues are going to notice a significant difference right away.
Right.
And they'll notice that it's easier to breathe. And that's the thing. It's easier to breathe. They'll feel like they're breathing through a straw, and then the straw expands, right?
So asthmatics, you
Asthma,
know,
asthma with the caveat, it depends on the type of asthma.
okay.
There are different proclivities for branch issues. If it's a if there's a let's say like shortened branch or certain, so it's essentially if you have certain pathways down the respiratory system are inhibited, then it might not help as much, right?
So like maybe exercise induced, it might help
Yes,
because,
exercise induced, yes.
but maybe allergy induced, maybe, maybe not.
Allergy induced it will help with too. It's only structurally induced. So if someone has asthma because of a structural impediment like pectoris
Oh, I see. Yes.
yeah, so it's not gonna, if it's a structural reason, like they have, for example, they could have spinal stenosis or scoliosis that
Right,
impedes
right,
the
right.
functional airways passing,
Mhm.
then it's not gonna help with that, right? You
Right,
need to
right.
address the fascia first, you address the spinal scoliosis, and then you can recreate it. But that's
Start
just,
working with the breathing. Got it.
yeah, yeah.
So what other, besides, Corey, would you think would be, um, trigger somebody to think that this would be good for
So
them?
you had to come closer to the,
What other chronic disease processes might be good besides the respiratory that might trigger somebody to say, "Man, I want to learn more about this. I have
I,
whatever."
I do think that chronic dehydration in the elderly is one of the things that I say, well, this is going to help with that. If you have mental issues as well, mental fogginess, this
Like
can also help.
memory and
Memory issues can help with it. That's one of the things that we've actually seen acute benefits from just by using the headphones with the hydrogen inhalation going through the ear canal and straight to the brain. Um,
interesting.
but and there's reasonings for that because when it penetrates into the brain, there's some literature about what gets stored in the brain in terms of different materials that get lodged into places because they get bonded to things, and that the hydrogen can actually decouple and loosen those bonds in certain ways that actually opens up different pathways and helps minimize heavy metal toxicity and other things that could be inflicting damage on the brain, and opens up those neural pathways to be more reactive and active. But as a base note, I would say anything that has to do with the functional ability for your body to express, deliver, and receive resources, this can help with. So any diseases that are oriented around that. So for example, if you have neuropathy, that's something that people could really consider that this is a big complementary therapy along with, for example, like the microcurrent therapy, because the microcurrent's only as good as your fascia, your nervous system is able to connect to
Right.
fire off and signal. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes you have neuropathy not because of a uh, a weakness of your nervous system, but a weakness of your circulatory system, right? And the inability for you to actually get the resources down to the area. And we'll find oftentimes if their feet is just so dry and just drained of any type of resource in the region, any liquid in the region, like you'll notice immediately when you talk when you're prodding a neuropathy patient, the skin, like they'll lose the hair, and it's one of the markers because there's no hydration in the fascia, right? There's nothing to stimulate the actual follicle in the area to actually
Interesting.
distribute the debris to the hair follicle, right? Because there's no fascial layer for that. Well, when you actually start to use the hydrogen inhalation, you start to rebuild that fascial layer, right? It
Okay.
makes it thicker, right?
Right.
And then you can use the microcurrent to essentially optimize that layer afterwards too. So
Very good.
it's definitely something to think about with in terms of neuropathy. If you have respiratory issues, if you have circulatory issues, these are all things that are very helpful. And then on the secondary effect, if you have if you care about your overall mental health and your brain clarity, this is also an optimized system to get as well.
Have there been any studies with dementia and Alzheimer's?
There have been studies using hydrogen inhalation or Brown's gas with dementia and Alzheimer's. It has to do a lot with overall, like I said, with gene expression and enabling the body to naturally mitigate its own processes. A lot of people believe that dementia and dementia is in some way, shape, or form a memory recall problem, cascading along with the inability for different neurons to actually connect and fire, right? So it's a connective tissue problem between either there's something disrupting the connective tissue from firing, or they're not working naturally like they should. Well, in both cases, if there's something inhibiting those neurons from firing, then you need to take it away. And if there's something that is not expressing properly because they're not working, well, then you need to give them an optimized solution to actually help mitigate that.
Very good.
Yeah.
Very
For
good.
Alzheimer's, it's a little bit different, in that mechanism because there's a different neurological agent involved with that, where you're trying to mitigate the neurological decay of that substance.
Got it. So with any of these chronic problems for people, how often would the therapy need to be um, uh, produced?
Ideally, depending on the flow rate. So this is where I get into flow rate. So you're roughly going to look at like 4,500 milliliters, so about 4.5 liters of hydrogen gas into the body is the minimum threshold for what we see in studies as a medical therapy, validated therapy option. So depending on the device, if you have, and roughly for about 3 to 4 days, but in many instances, like for example, the respiratory issues, that's a one and done type of situation where you can do it. You can come in, do it like once every day for a week, and you'll see significant difference permanently. Unless, of course, you go and re-damage your lungs by smoking again or gunking it back up. So there's not the caveat like, oh, you're good forever, right? Nothing's good forever in terms of technicality if you hurt yourself. But the concept of how often you have to do it depends on the disease, depends on the symptoms. If you're just doing it for optimization and overall beneficial health, once every 3 days to 2 days could be a very beneficial timeline for that as terms of scheduling. If you're doing it on a proactive basis, once a week coming in could be very proactive. If you're doing it on a reactive basis, depending on the disease, it could be as much as every day, depending on the disease. So, for example, if they have neuropathy, if they have COPD, if they have some form of intense mechanism that really the damage is recurring, then they're going to want to do it every day, right?
Right.
And
Okay.
I think that there are systems, and we do leasing programs and we do sell devices, and I think that is a beneficial concept to maybe get their own device for that, right?
So
Um,
if they're really needing, if they're pretty chronic, then they're gonna want to look at daily treatment.
Yeah, it will depends on how chronic someone is.
Yeah.
And I would, and I would always say like, look, because for anyone who might be listening to this, I would say there's everyone likes to think that they're way worse than they are, and I always want to pre-deposit like, there could be worse, right? We've seen, I've personally seen some very, very bad cases like of patients who are on death's door, and seeing what they need to actually get change in tissue, change in actual recovery and processes. And then I've seen cases where people have been like perfectly healthy, but they claim they're sick or they claim that they're very unhealthy. And I've also seen positive change. My sentiment is that less is more in a primary recommendation. But the nice thing is I only use technologies where if I did too much, it's not going to harm the
It's
patient.
not going to harm anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the beneficial side. And if under the circumstance they do feel significant change in their own body after doing a therapy session, then yes, doing more is not going to hurt. And scheduling options for that are concurrently. It's just about, how much do you want to pay? What do you actually want to go through? And how much effect do you actually get out of it? Because we see patients at our center where you're going to, where the first therapy option, they feel really good, right? And then the second option, they feel okay. And it's like, okay, that's great. And then the third option, they don't feel anything. And then they say, well, why is that? Why did I go this trend? It's like, well, that's great.
That's the right direction.
That when it needs to help you, it helps you, right? and then when it doesn't need to help you, you're good, right?
Yeah,
So you know that you have a essentially a viable option on that, right? It's like I don't
yeah,
want false positives where it hurts someone. You're not getting that, right? So
yeah,
it can be very beneficial, and it's very experiential because a lot of different people have different issues. They aren't are undiagnosed. They don't realize, and then when they actually start to realize that, hey, maybe their heart rate's a little too fast, or they're always in a panic mode because of it. This is creating chronic stress, chronic inflammation, and all of a sudden you start to bring that down. It's very beneficial and extremely proactive with your overall health as well. So,
all right. Well, I think this should give people at least a little bit of an understanding of how the machine works, what they can expect from it. And Brendan, I really appreciate
yep.
taking the time out to put this together with me. And I'm really excited because I think we can help a lot of people with this technology. And I'm excited about putting this out and with my patient base. And I do appreciate all your help.
All right. Well, I appreciate you as well, and I look forward to seeing the people we can help.
Yes, thank you.
All right.
Bye bye.